As the early light of dawn gave way to a day heavy with uncertainty, Elias could not shake the oppressive presence that clung to him like a second skin. The spectral images from the mirror still danced at the edges of his vision, and the phantom whispers seemed to murmur incessantly in the recesses of his mind. Determined to forge ahead, he returned to his modest apartment, a cramped space cluttered with old maps, historical records, and photographs of forgotten industrial sites, to piece together the fragments of the mystery that had so thoroughly consumed him. Late that morning, while poring over faded newspaper clippings and archived documents, Elias stumbled upon a name that resonated with the sorrowful legacy of Boiler Stack 9, Margaret Hensley. A local historian and descendant of one of the workers who had perished in the grim corridors of the stack, Margaret's research promised insights into the human cost of industrial ambition. Intrigued by the possibility of unearthing more clues, Elias resolved to meet her. If anyone could help him decipher the cryptic entries in Thomas's journal and the mirror's haunting revelations, it would be her. That very afternoon, he found himself on a narrow, winding street leading to an old community center turned archive. The building itself was a relic, a time-worn structure whose walls bore the scars of decades of neglect and whispered memories of lives once lived. Inside, amidst the rustle of yellowed pages and the murmur of hushed conversations, Elias was introduced to Margaret. Her eyes, steady and sorrowful, reflected both intelligence and a quiet grief born of personal loss. Over cups of bitter tea in a small reading room, she listened intently as Elias recounted his experiences at the stack, the spectral mirror, and the unsettling revelations hidden within the diary. Margaret's expression grew somber as she recalled the day her own father had vanished from the premises of the factory, a disappearance that had long been shrouded in mystery and officially written off as one of the countless tragedies of the industrial era. With a measured tone, she revealed that there were murmurs among the older residents, whispered stories passed down through generations about a cursed mirror and an unholy pact sealed in the depths of Boiler Stack 9. According to local lore, the mirror was not merely a passive artifact. It was an active participant in a dark ritual, one that bound the souls of the workers to the heart of the structure, ensuring that their torment would be relived for eternity. As the gravity of her words sank in, Elias found himself caught in a maelstrom of dread and determination. The implications were staggering. The suffering captured in that mirror was not confined to mere memories, but was an active force, a malevolent energy born of injustice and sealed by human cruelty. Together, Elias and Margaret pored over every scrap of evidence she had accumulated, old blueprints of the stack, personal letters, and testimonies from surviving relatives. Slowly, a pattern emerged, one that pointed to a clandestine group of industrialists and overseers who had orchestrated a series of secret rituals. Their aim was not only to maximize production but to harness a mysterious energy they believed could be extracted from human despair. Armed with these new insights, Elias felt the call to return once more to Boiler Stack 9. The day's light had already begun to fade into a bruised twilight as he and Margaret, carrying her meticulously gathered documents and his own salvaged diary, set out together towards the looming relic. The air was charged with an eerie anticipation, as though the night itself held its breath in expectation of what was to come. As they approached the entrance, the dilapidated facade of Boiler Stack 9 loomed like a dark sentinel against the gathering gloom. Every step up the creaking staircase felt as if it were a journey into the very abyss of human suffering. Margaret's presence, a calm and measured contrast to Elias's burning urgency, lent him a steadiness he desperately needed. With every cautious step, they retraced the paths that had once led Elias to the spectral mirror, their flashlights slicing through the darkness like fragile spears of hope. Deep within the labyrinthine interior of the stack, they discovered a narrow corridor that neither had explored before, a passageway concealed behind a partially collapsed wall. The air here was different, denser, colder, almost as if it were a physical manifestation of the sorrow that had seeped into every crack and crevice. The walls bore strange symbols carved into the concrete, not by the hands of a weary worker, but by someone who had a knowledge of arcane rituals. Elias's heart pounded in recognition, These symbols were the very markings described in Thomas's hurried notes, a language of despair and forbidden magic, etched into the fabric of the building to seal away a dark pact. In a small, hidden chamber at the end of the corridor, they found remnants of a hastily abandoned altar. Here, dust mingled with the faint odor of incense long burned out, and scattered around the altar lay broken relics, a tarnished chalice, a frayed piece of ceremonial fabric, and an old ledger whose pages chronicled a series of transactions that seemed to balance the scales between greed and the occult. Each item was a silent witness to the desperate measures taken by those who had sought to harness an otherworldly power, one that demanded a terrible price from the souls trapped within Boiler Stack 9. Margaret's eyes filled with both sorrow and resolve as she examined the ledger. It was a ledger that recorded not monetary transactions, but something far more macabre, a tally of souls, each entry marked with a name, a date, and a cryptic symbol that resonated with the markings on the walls. The realization that these transactions were not mere numbers, but the sealing of fate for countless workers filled the room with a palpable chill. Elias felt a deep kinship with the suffering inscribed in those records, his own journey now intertwined with the lives of those who had been lost to a monstrous design. Outside, the wind began to howl, carrying with it the mournful keening of a long-forgotten lament. The stack seemed to shudder as though in anticipation of some unseen reckoning. In that moment, both Elias and Margaret sensed that the time had come to confront the heart of the curse, a final act of reckoning that might finally free the tortured souls ensnared within these walls. As they gathered their evidence and prepared to leave the chamber, the ground beneath them trembled imperceptibly, and a deep, resonant hum emanated from the very core of the building, a sound that was both mechanical and eerily organic. With trepidation mingled with determination, they ascended once more towards the central chamber, where the spectral mirror had once revealed its haunted visions. The corridor leading to it was now aglow with an unnatural luminescence, as if the very energy of the stack had been awakened by their presence. Shadows stretched and writhed along the walls, merging into indistinct shapes that mimicked the forms of the lost souls whose stories had been so cruelly silenced. It was as if the building itself were alive, a living, breathing testament to human folly and the enduring agony of the past. Standing before the mirror once again, Elias and Margaret exchanged a silent understanding. The mirror, its surface now eerily smooth and unblemished by time, beckoned them to confront its secrets head-on. With a deep breath, Elias reached out, placing his hand against the cool glass. The moment his skin made contact, the mirror flared with a spectral light, and the room was filled with the anguished cries of hundreds of voices. In that overwhelming cascade of sound, faces appeared, faces of men, women, and children who had suffered, their eyes brimming with sorrow, despair, and a desperate plea for liberation. The mirror's surface became a portal to memories long buried, each vision interwoven with the sound of Margaret's steady voice recounting the details from the ledger and the old documents. The ritual of the past unfolded before them, a dark ceremony where promises were made in exchange for power, where hope was sacrificed at the altar of ambition. The overwhelming energy of the moment threatened to engulf them both, drawing them into a vortex of time and pain. Yet, amidst the chaos of spectral images and tortured cries, a singular vision emerged, a vision of a luminous figure, distinct from the rest, who reached out with an expression of forgiveness and yearning for release. Elias felt that this figure was the key, a beacon of hope amidst the pervasive darkness. As the spectral voices swirled around him, he realized that the only way to break the curse was to honor the memory of the souls and to acknowledge the injustice that had bound them here. With Margaret's quiet guidance, he began to speak aloud, his voice trembling with raw emotion as he recited the names from the ledger. Each name was a litany of sorrow and redemption, a plea for the forgotten to be seen and heard. The act of remembrance, of giving voice to the silenced, seemed to create a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The oppressive hum receded, and the spectral images softened, as if the mirror itself were offering absolution. For what felt like an eternity, Elias and Margaret remained there, their voices merging with the echoes of the past. In that sacred moment, the barrier between the living and the dead thinned, and the phantom whispers transformed from cries of anguish into a gentle chorus of gratitude. The luminous figure in the mirror smiled, a gesture of release and forgiveness, and then slowly faded into the surrounding light, leaving behind an overwhelming sense of peace that resonated within both hearts. When at last the spectral vision dissipated completely, silence returned to the chamber. The mirror surface, now quiet and dark, reflected not only their exhausted faces, but also the promise of a future unburdened by the relentless grip of past injustices. Elias and Margaret knew that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a turning point where the tortured souls of Boiler Stack 9 could finally be set free through the simple act of remembrance and acknowledgement. Stepping away from the mirror, they felt the oppressive weight of the stack begin to lift. Outside, the wind had subsided, and the night sky was beginning to yield to the first hints of dawn. There was a tangible sense of renewal in the air, a promise that even the deepest scars could eventually heal when the truth was embraced. Elias, heart pounding with both relief and a lingering sorrow for the lost, vowed to continue his mission. The secret of Boiler Stack 9, its phantom whispers and tragic history, would not be consigned to obscurity. Instead, it would serve as a reminder that even in the depths of despair, the light of remembrance and justice could guide the way to redemption. In the quiet moments before the new day fully broke, as Elias and Margaret left the decrepit structure behind, the echoes of the past continued to murmur softly, a lullaby of sorrow and hope that would forever remain imprinted in the walls of Boiler Stack 9. Their journey was far from over, and as they stepped into the light of a dawning day, both understood that every whispered secret carried the weight of history, and every act of remembrance was a step toward healing a world long marred by its own dark ambitions. Thus, with evidence in hand and a renewed sense of purpose, they set forth to share their revelations with the world, determined that the voices of the silenced would never again be forgotten. The haunting legacy of Boiler Stack 9 had been confronted, its dark pact acknowledged, and in doing so, a fragile hope had been born, a hope that the phantom whispers might finally find peace. Night had fallen once again over the dilapidated edifice of Boiler Stack 9. The building, now etched in the minds of those who dared to know its story, seemed to breathe in the darkness, a living relic of sorrow and regret. Elias and Margaret had spent days gathering evidence and testimonies, and although their revelations had begun to lift the oppressive weight of the past, a deeper mystery remained unsolved. The final chapter of this haunted tale was poised to unfold, and with trepidation and a steely resolve, they returned to confront the enigmatic forces that had long held the stack in a grip of supernatural despair. As they approached the crumbling facade under a star-strewn sky, the wind carried not only the chill of winter, but also an undercurrent of whispered warnings. The echo of distant machinery, long silenced by time, seemed to resonate with an almost musical quality, a mournful dirge that beckoned them into the heart of darkness. Elias's pulse quickened as he recalled the spectral visions from the mirror and the ledger's sinister record of souls. Every step toward the entrance felt like a descent into a labyrinth of memories and unresolved anguish. Inside, the corridors of Boiler Stack 9 were cloaked in an eerie half-light, as though the very structure were suspended between two realms. The passageways were narrower than before, their surfaces damp with condensation and the residue of unspoken secrets. Elias led the way, his flashlight casting long, wavering beams that danced upon walls scrawled with cryptic symbols and layers of graffiti, a silent testimony to desperate attempts at communication from those who had suffered within these walls. Margaret, her eyes resolute and her hands steady despite the chill in the air, followed closely. Together, they carried the weight of an obligation to honor the memories of the fallen and to expose the hidden truths that had been buried beneath rust and decay. Their path led them to a vast, vaulted chamber at the core of the stack, a place where the air grew denser and every sound echoed like a heartbeat. Here, machinery from a bygone era lay scattered and broken, its skeletal remains entwined with creeping ivy and the relentless passage of time. In the center of this chamber stood an ancient control panel, its dials and levers frozen in a state of disrepair. But it was not the machinery that drew their attention. It was a series of fresh markings scrawled in a substance that glowed faintly in the darkness. The markings formed a complex pattern, a sigil or glyph that pulsed with a malevolent energy. Elias's eyes widened as he recognized the symbols from Thomas's final frantic entries, details that hinted at a ritual incomplete, a forbidden covenant left unfulfilled. Margaret knelt beside the glowing script, her fingers hovering over the smooth, almost otherworldly lines. "This isn't just graffiti," she murmured, voice low with both fear and wonder. "It's a seal, a ward of sorts, designed to contain something within these walls." The realization struck her as they examined the symbols more closely. The markings suggested that there had been an effort, perhaps desperate and clandestine, to imprison an entity or force too potent to be left free. As they pieced together the remnants of this dark ritual, the sound of the wind outside seemed to intensify, as if nature itself were warning them of the consequences of unsealing the past. In the center of the chamber, beneath the arcane sigil, lay a heavy iron-bound chest. Its surface was scarred with burns and etchings that hinted at both industrial labor and occult craftsmanship. Elias's hand trembled as he reached for the chest, feeling a magnetic pull, as though the object contained not just memories, but the very essence of despair. With a cautious heave, he pried open the rusted latch. The chest creaked open to reveal a cache of documents, photographs, and small, intricately carved tokens. Among the contents was a fragile parchment, its ink faded yet unmistakable in its intent. It was an account of the final ritual that had been attempted by a secretive cabal of industrial overseers, desperate to harness the raw energy of human suffering for their own gain. The parchment detailed the arrangement of the sigil, the sacrifices demanded, and the promise of power if the ritual succeeded. Yet, it was clear that something had gone terribly wrong. The ritual had been abruptly abandoned, leaving behind a rupture in the barrier between the living and the dead. As Elias read the text aloud, his voice reverberated off the cold stone walls. The words were laced with regret and a dire warning that tampering with forces beyond mortal comprehension came at an unfathomable cost. Each sentence was a step deeper into a past marred by cruelty and hubris, and as the final lines echoed in the silent chamber, a palpable shift in the atmosphere made the hair on the back of their necks stand on end. A low rumble vibrated through the floor, a deep resonance that seemed to emanate from the very bowels of the building. The sound was not mechanical, nor was it the creaking of old metal. It was as if the stack itself were awakening, stirring in response to the breach in its ancient seals. Margaret's eyes met Elias's, and in that silent exchange, they understood that the moment of reckoning had arrived. The forces once bound by the ritual were beginning to stir, their spectral forms manifesting in the flickering shadows around them. Without warning, the chamber plunged into darkness. The flashlight beams danced erratically, casting chaotic shapes against the walls. In the oppressive blackness, the air seemed to thicken, filled with a chorus of murmurs and disjointed voices, a cacophony of phantom whispers, now louder and more insistent than ever. Elias felt a cold, clammy hand brush against his arm, sending a shock of terror through his veins. The sensation was not merely physical. It was as though the very souls of the damned were reaching out to him, desperate to be acknowledged once more. Margaret's voice cut through the mounting chaos. "We must complete the ritual as it was meant to be done," she said, her tone resolute despite the fear that danced in her eyes. "If we do not honor the balance, the barrier will break completely, and the darkness will consume us all." Elias hesitated, torn between the instinct to flee and the solemn duty to set right the wrongs of the past. The parchment lay open before him, its faded ink providing the only guide to what needed to be done. The instructions were cryptic and required not only the recitation of names and the positioning of the carved tokens, but also a heartfelt invocation of remembrance, a plea for forgiveness from those who had been wronged. In the midst of the tumult, The chamber's shadows began to coalesce into distinct forms. Faces, contorted with sorrow and anguish, emerged from the darkness. They circled Elias and Margaret, their eyes pleading for release, and their lips mouthing silent words of gratitude and despair. The spectral assembly was a living archive of every injustice and every loss inflicted within these walls, and they formed a circle around the pair, as if guarding the sacred space where the final act of reconciliation was to take place. Elias's voice wavered as he began to recite the names from the ledger, each name a testament to a life stolen by greed and neglect. The sound of his words mingled with the soft rustling of the tokens as Margaret carefully arranged them along the sigil inscribed on the chamber floor. With every name uttered, the atmosphere shifted. What had been a storm of torment slowly gave way to a sorrowful, meditative silence. It was as though the very act of remembrance was stitching the torn fabric of time, offering the imprisoned souls a path to absolution. As Elias continued the invocation, the low hum of the building deepened into a resonant chorus. The ghostly forms hovered closer, their features softening as if relieved by the acknowledgement of their suffering. The ritual reached a crescendo when Elias, with eyes closed in concentration, recited the final lines of the incantation, a plea for forgiveness, a promise to carry their stories into the light of day. In that charged moment, a brilliant flash of spectral light erupted from the sigil, enveloping the chamber in a radiant glow that defied the oppressive darkness. For several agonizing seconds, time seemed to stand still. The ethereal light washed over every corner of the chamber, dissolving the malevolent shadows and filling the space with an overwhelming sense of peace. When the light faded and the darkness returned, the spectral assembly was gone. Their presence, once a cacophony of despair, had been transformed into a gentle silence. In their place lingered a feeling of profound gratitude, as if the tortured souls had finally found a measure of rest through the simple act of remembrance. Breathing heavily, Elias and Margaret surveyed the chamber, their hearts still pounding with a mixture of relief and lingering trepidation. The ritual had been completed, and the ancient seals were mending themselves in the wake of their heartfelt invocation. Yet, the encounter had left an indelible mark on both of them, a solemn reminder that the boundary between the living and the dead was fragile, and that the echoes of the past could never truly be silenced. Outside, the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, casting a pale glow over the ruined structure of Boiler Stack 9. The building, which had long been a vessel of sorrow and spectral torment, now seemed to exhale a long-held breath, a sigh of relief from the souls that had suffered within its walls. Elias and Margaret emerged from the chamber, their expressions a blend of exhaustion and quiet triumph. They knew that their journey was not yet complete. The truth of Boiler Stack 9 was a story that needed to be told, not only as a chronicle of industrial cruelty, but as a testament to the resilience of those who had endured its horrors. In the days that followed, as word of their discoveries began to ripple through the community, a quiet transformation took hold. Former skeptics and believers alike found solace in the narrative of redemption that had emerged from the depths of the stack. The tale of the phantom whispers, the haunted mirror, and the forbidden ritual became a symbol, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of human ambition, the light of truth and remembrance could forge a path toward healing. For Elias and Margaret, the experience at Boiler Stack 9 had been both a personal and collective reckoning. They continued to gather the scattered fragments of history, interviewing descendants, poring over old records, and documenting the spectral accounts of those long gone, so that the voices of the silenced might echo into the future. Their work, driven by a commitment to honor every life lost to the ravages of industrial neglect and human greed, became a beacon for others seeking to confront the past. Standing before the remnants of the ancient control panel one last time, Elias reflected on the profound changes wrought by their journey. The harsh clang of machinery had been replaced by the soft murmur of remembered names, and the oppressive gloom had given way to the hopeful hues of dawn. In that fragile moment, he understood that the true legacy of Boiler Stack 9 was not solely its haunted history, but the power of remembrance, a force strong enough to transform pain into healing and sorrow into hope. As the sun ascended into the pale morning sky, Elias and Margaret departed the site with a solemn promise to share their story with a world that had long forgotten the price of progress. The phantom whispers of Boiler Stack 9 had finally been heard, their secrets brought into the light of day. And as the building faded into the distance, a silent monument to a bygone era, the echoes of its tragic past merged with the promise of a future where every whispered secret, every spectral lament, would be honored and remembered. Thus, with hearts emboldened by their triumph over darkness and a resolve forged in the crucible of suffering, they stepped forward into the new day. Their voices, now joined in a chorus of truth and remembrance, would carry the legacy of Boiler Stack 9 into the annals of time, a testament to the enduring power of memory and the hope that even the deepest scars can eventually find solace in the light.